Sexual Perversion, Presentation 4 by Emily Hillel. Sexual Perversion by Thomas Nigel, 1969. The point of this journal is to examine the concept of sexual perversion. It defends against the charge of unintelligibility and tries to say exactly what about human sexuality qualifies it to admit of perversion. There are three general conditions of sexual perversion. The first states that it has to be sexual desire or practice that can be plausibly described as in some sense unnatural. There's a problem to the statement because the explanation on natural versus unnatural is undefined. The second states that certain practices will be perversions, if any, is a shoe fetish, bestiality, and sadism. Unendured sexual intercourse is not. The third states that if there are any perversions, there will be unnatural sexual inclinations rather than merely unnatural practices adopted not for inclination but for other reasons. A sexual perversion must reveal itself in conduct that expresses an unnatural sexual preference. Thomas states that he believes there is no connection between sex and reproduction on sexual perversion. It's a concept of psychological, not physiological interest. It is not applied to lower animals, but may apply to higher animals because of their psychological similarities to humans. Also, it does not apply to deviation from reproductive function of sex in humans, such as sterility, miscarriage, contraception, and abortion. Also, what is natural varies from culture to culture. Thomas attempts to describe the psychological view of sexual perversion. One point states that sexual desire is simply one of the appetites, like hunger and thirst. A radical position states that appetite is identified as sexual by means of the organs and erogenous zones, in which its satisfaction can be to some extent localized, and special sensory pleasures which form the core of that satisfaction. Hunger and eating are important like sex, that they serve as a biological function and also play a significant role in our inner lives. Eating wood, paper, and sand are not considered perverted, just odd, due to the lack of psychological complexity we expect of perversions. If someone likes to eat cookbooks or magazine pictures with food on it, on the other hand, the concept of perversion seems appropriate. Thomas uses appetite to make sense of the concept to sexual perversion, not an attempt to imply sexual desire is an appetite. It cannot be denied that sex may serve various functions, such as economic and social, but it also has its own content as a relation between persons, and it is only by analyzing that relation that we can understand the conditions of sexual perversion. Sex involves a desire that one's partner be aroused by the recognition of one's desire that he or she may be aroused. Hunger leads to spontaneous interactions with food. On the other hand, sexual desire leads to spontaneous interactions with other persons whose bodies are asserting their sovereignty in the same way, producing involuntary reactions and spontaneous impulses in them. Sexual perversion is a cycle of reactions that are perceived, and the perception of them is perceived, and the perception is in return perceived. This is why, for example, intercourse with a child of 5 is a sexual perversion, because the cycle of psychological perception is broken by the child's inability to share the same feeling as an adult. Throughout this reading, I found that Thomas Nigel took an interesting approach to identify sexual perversion, using analogies such as appetite and hunger that most people can relate to. I also found that his take on homosexuality was intriguing. Thomas tried to identify homosexuality in this journal, which most people at that time believed it was a sexual perversion, but Thomas claimed it was not clear enough and it seemed unlikely. I believe if Thomas were to write this journal now, he wouldn't have even mentioned homosexuality, or he would have included how it was the opposite of sexual perversion.